Conflagration. =RK equals. Part 3. Operations Room. GAR HQ. Coruscant. Give me a status report. What the criff is happening? Valentra's voice snapped like a whip. We're being jammed. Landlines are out. The young lieutenant overseeing the comms exclaimed. Put the base on alert. We're either under attack or soon will be. Obi-Wan ordered. Another raid? The Separatist couldn't have gotten a proper fleet here without us noticing. Teller grumbled. This place was supposed to be secure after what happened with the last HQ. Worry about that later. Let's make sure we won't end like the previous High-Com staff, Kenobi whispered. The Jedi's hand went for the handle of his blade and he turned around to face the door. Alarms began roaring a moment after it opened, revealing Teen wearing a combat armor. He was followed by a squad of armored people. Were those Cathar? I have the sneaking suspicion you've got something to do with this, Master Teen. Valentra narrowed his eyes at the newcomers. General Valentra, General Kenobi, the Horned Jedi nodded. It's good you're both here. You're under arrest for treason. The staff in the large room began looking between the newcomers and their commanders. The two clones stationed at the door stood very still when Teen entered, revealing that they were kept at gunpoint by his men. What madness is this? Valentra snapped. You're getting too far, Teen. This is treason. Treason? Says the man serving the Sith. The man serving the people who began the Clone Wars so they can ascend to power. Teen shot back. Why don't you tell him, Kenobi? Or aren't you aware of it? Didn't your new friend tell you? It's Palpatine. Teen snarled. He's the Sith we've been searching for ever since your master was murdered on Naboo. He's the Sith Lord behind the war. That accusation gave anyone pause, though it didn't do much to stop the rising anger of the officers in the operations room. I can see you believe this. Obi-Wan spoke carefully. Do you have any proof? Stand down. A clone shouted from the corridor behind Teen. Blasters spoke and the two men guarding the door were cut down. There they stood while a firefight erupted outside. Teen drew his lightsaber and Obi-Wan followed suit. The Jedi Master stepped further in the room and was followed by a squad of armored men while others were exchanging fire at what had to be a security detail. That's when all hell broke loose. One of the officers drew a blaster and Teen's people opened fire. =RK equals. R&D complex. Location classified. Coruscant. Dr. Zash, you've got a visitor. One of her assistants called over the comm. The Sith grumbled and looked up from her work. She had a lot of fun catching up on new discoveries and theories found while she was away. She knew something was going to happen today. Even as clouded as the Force was lately, Zash still could feel its faint warning. She turned away from the table where she was examining an ancient device with yet undetermined function and smiled at one of the cameras in her lab. By all means, send them in. The door hissed open and a small hunched figure hobbled in. Master Yoda, to what do I owe this pleasure? Zash's words were pure sarcasm. Surprised you're not? The Jedi Master stated the obvious. I had a feeling my day work would be disturbed this afternoon. Sidious? Yoda asked. Never heard of that. Some kind of STD? It sounds like it. Zash mocked. Yoda's ears flattened along his skull. Dark the time is. Too powerful the Sith are. Stopped you must be. Yoda's voice had a melancholy echoing with each word. So? It's not illegal by the Republic's own laws, Zash chuckled in delight. Mistaken I was. Too late it is, Yoda sighed. He left his cane to fall and called his lightsaber into his outstretched hand. Fight we will. The fate of the galaxy today decided will be. If you insist. I can use a bit of workout. Zash hummed happily. She raised a hand and her own saber jumped into her palm like an eager puppy. =RK equals. Secure room. Chancellor Suite. Senate Building. Coruscant. I want an explanation now. Palpatine glared at the captain in charge of his security detail. I don't appreciate being manhandled in my own office. There are attacks underway, sir. As you know, earlier today Director Ruler was assassinated. I was told yes, and I should be getting a briefing on that situation right about now. The Chancellor narrowed his eyes at the clone. We just got unconfirmed reports about more attacks. Communications are down due to jamming. QRF should be rolling in soon. We believe it's another separatist raid meant to disrupt us while their offensive is underway. The soldier reported. Thanks to you it's succeeding, Palpatine snapped. He closed his eyes and took a moment to get his temper under control. Since the last night the Force had been constantly shifting. There was a sense of foreboding in the air, yet Sidious had been unable to narrow down any details. Was it the Separatists pulling off some new stunt? The Jedi acting up? The Senate or even Valor Zash pulling a fast one? Sidious didn't know, which kept him constantly on edge. This was a critical moment. The enemy would be hitting Corellia today if they hadn't already, and Kuat would follow. This was the worst possible moment for the Jedi to act up. For example, calling Order 66 right now might spell a disaster. While Sidious had a contingency ready to explain why he might have to send the army against the Order, this wasn't the time for that. Crif all. Confirm that. The captain ordered as he listened to something over the comm built into his helmet. Good for them. We're at lockdown. The primary can decide if he wants to see the prisoner when the situation becomes clear and we're secure. What is happening, Captain? Palpatine put forth his patented exasperated old man persona. An attempted breach of the building. 2 Jedi Masters coming to see you intercepted it and captured its leader, Count Dooku apparently. They asked to meet you anyway and to present you the prisoner. The soldier shook his head. Ah, I see. Palpatine smiled, while internally he became very still. Dooku was supposed to be in Confederate custody, possibly dead even. Getting away and actually attempting an attack on the Senate or even just trying to meet with Sidious in this building? That was sheer madness, nothing like what Tyrannus would do. The Chancellor kept his smile on and looked at the security detail surrounding him. 6 clones and 3 Jedi Knights, who looked on edge. Sidious didn't dare access the Force right now to make sure, though he was convinced he knew what was happening. The Confederacy Council had indeed pulled a fast one. Covertly contacting the Jedi, handing Dooku after Palpatine made sure that all official attempts to do so fell through because he was convinced it was another separatist trap. Dooku had been in Jedi custody for some time. He had talked and the Jedi were moving to remove the Sith from power. That's what was happening. Dooku had been brought along so they could plausibly get a large group of Jedi close to him without enough warning. Palpatine frowned. They must have allies, because what was happening, it simply felt off. He would have expected the Jedi to march in and confront him publicly. This however smelled like a planned coup, which implied support and some rather unpleasant things. That's why Ula was murdered. He must have found something or got too close. Palpatine went behind his desk and sat in the chair, making himself look like a tired old man. There had been Jedi on his security detail for months, which meant it was compromised. That was partially accounted for. He was planning to use them as scapegoats once the time for Order 66 came anyway. Now the only question was how to play this. Palpatine looked around the room. The walls were decorated with shelves covered in Sith artifacts and art, including a dense metal statue where his lightsaber was hidden. There were also various recording devices he could switch one from a hidden button on his desk. The Jedi wanted to play for keeps. So be it. Palpatine switched on the recording devices and turned around along with his seat until his back was turned towards the security detail. Sidious's lips slowly twisted into a vicious smile. He let his mask crack and accessed the Force. The 3 Jedi in the room stiffened and Palpatine's smile grew, but now for long. The Sith Lord could sense danger in the air. The Force was high on anticipation, but that was it. The dark side was clouding the future from his gaze. Was that how the Jedi felt ever since the Sith began preventing them from divining the future? Sidious didn't appreciate the irony. All that was left was to decide should he wait for the Jedi to properly hang themselves or start the ball rolling right now. Both choices had problems, if all this was a setup to have him show his true colors. Sidious dismissed that idea. He had enough backing to survive the backslash of being declared a Sith. Decent odds to get away with purging the Jedi too, even if they didn't give him a clear-cut reason to do it. Sidious felt danger approaching and felt relief. After all those years of hiding, he could finally cut loose. The Sith let his perception expand, sensed the rising fear of the Jedi in the room and then clearly felt a familiar presence approaching. It was surrounded by Force signatures Sidious didn't know, which was expected. He had been doing his best not to use the Force around Jedi after all. It was time to see if he can properly turn this little trap against the people moving against him. =RK=. Part 4. Flag Bridge. Republic Cruiser Without Fear. Kuat. Multiple hyperspace events. Updating tactical. Bring the fleet to battle stations. Admiral Coburn ordered and fixed the holotank with his eyes, willing it to update faster. That's a lot of ships. A staff officer muttered. Much less than what's at Corellia though. The man sounded relieved. The display finished refreshing with the new data. Coburn could honestly say that he agreed with the sentiment. Oh, the Republican local forces at Kuwait were outnumbered by a lot, as expected. Nonetheless, the admiral felt calmer. His worst fears didn't materialize. He had the enemy comfortably outgunned. Now he simply had to reduce them before they could cause too much damage. First echelon battle groups, you're free to go. Red 1 is in effect. Kuwait Command, release the battle cruisers, but keep those mandators in reserve. Second echelon, wait until the enemy chooses a target, then intercept them. Until further notice, the primary objective remains preserving industrial assets across the system. Coburn ordered. 30 battle groups, each built around 3 Venotas, plotted a hyperspace jump and soon materialized in the face of the enemy fleet. Seconds later they were followed by all Preta battle cruisers and the few of their direct predecessors which were still in service. Each of those were 3 kilometers long flying fortresses complete with heavy armor, even stronger shields and inconceivable amount of firepower. It was humbling to think that there were 7 much more powerful ships waiting in reserve. Coburn frowned. The first moments of the engagement happened as expected. The sheer shock of the attack and the firepower his subformations could bring to bear shattered the light ships in their immediate vicinity. However, the enemy didn't hesitate. The separatist fleet separated into subformations of its own and surged forward. They moved in such a way as to maximize the firepower they could bring upon the first echelon, while the bulk of their fleet simply avoided action and began spreading out. Second echelon, be ready to move. The enemy is picking up targets. Coburn ordered. Almost a quarter of the separatist fleet jumped in the way of the admiral's reserves, obviously to slow them down. After that, all but those engaging his first echelon made jumps toward various industrial sites, where they met smaller defensive forces and as much fixed defenses as could be spared. Sent in half the mandators to clean up the way. Second echelon, avoid the enemy forces heading your way and proceed with your mission. The admiral instructed. Third echelon. That was the GAR operational reserve, where his own ship was stationed. Clear the gravity well and await further orders. Kuwait Command, I'm leaving you with tactical command over remaining reserve, which was enough to handle any emergencies with its 3 mandators and escorts. What do you have up your sleeve? Coburn asked aloud while he watched the unfolding engagement. RK equals. CIC, Cis Dreadnought Conquest. First Fondor Sector Fleet Flagship. That's how you want to play it? Trench chuckled after seeing how the enemy reacted to his presence. Vanguard elements, break by squadrons and engage the enemy. Move in for englobement. Escorts screen the battleships. Concentrate on enemy propulsion. Once it's disabled, get out of range and ignore them. Designated munificent units are clear for ramming attacks. The admiral looked to the right, where Tonith's holo image floated awaiting orders. Admiral, you're to engage the bulk of the Republic Navy near Corellia itself. Third Fondor, you're to keep the pressure and provide reinforcements to the vanguard until they've disabled the Corellian cruisers. Second, divide in pre-designated task forces. We're going after the prize. Trench ordered. I'll handle them. Tonith saluted and went to engage the main Republic fleet. Trench on the other hand left the harder task for himself, coordinating almost the whole second while spread into more than 20 separate battle groups all over the system. He had a window of opportunity, few hours until heavy enemy reinforcements could arrive, and he was going to exploit the time for all it was worth it. The admiral concentrated his attention on the tactical display and began giving attack vectors to his forces. He sent 2 battle groups to clear up the newly built shipyards around the 2 dead worlds in the outer system. They were the most lightly defended of his primary targets. Trench himself led a full task force of his fleet, which was the most powerful one of the 3 making up Second Fondor Sector Fleet. His target was Salonia, the farthest from the sun planet of the 5 brothers. He gave the order and his ships separated into 4 battle groups which would maximize the amount of firepower he could bring to bear and ensure his ships wouldn't be getting in each other way or stand idly because they lacked clear firing lanes. Coordinates locked in, Admiral. A tactical droid announced. Commence insertion. Trench ordered. He barely felt the shift into the hyperspace and the almost immediate transition back to real space. Launch fighters and strike craft. Munificent divisions, take out the out-to-battle stations after the minefields are cleared. Requisants, concentrate on enemy light ships. Lucre hulks, targets of opportunity, with colon stations and other sources of heavy firepower being a priority. Trench shifted his attention to the vanguard. They were swarming those cruisers, making sure they won't be using hyperspace to get away. However, the price was heavy. Over their ships were dying by the second, and that wasn't going to change until the behemoths were disabled. That only made the success of this operation even more vital. A failure would meant the Confederacy would be criffed up once and for all. Yongling Training Center. Jedi Temple. Coruscant. Master Yaddle, you sent for me. Padawan Sarakitu offered the ancient Jedi a respectful nod. She frowned when a group of temple guards jogged to join them. Yes, please follow me. We don't have much time. Yaddle offered in a sad tone. Did something happen? Sarah asked, not even bothering to hide her concern. You can say that. Or that it's about to happen. We have a task, young Padawan. We have to get the younglings to safety. Yaddle explained. Is the temple going to be attacked again? Sarah exclaimed. In a manner of speaking. Yaddle nodded. An attack? One of the clones stationed nearby overheard them. Yes. I'm terribly sorry about this, young man. The Jedi Master waved a hand and the clones hit the wall behind them hard enough to knock them out. Master? Sarah exclaimed. Short version, Padawan. We finally figured out who is the Sith behind the war. It's Chancellor Palpatine. The Council is attempting to arrest him as we speak. It was also discovered that the clones had been commissioned by the Sith, and we expect them to side with them given the order. We need to get the younglings and other non-combatants to safety, because if the arrest attempt fails, the Sith will see us all along. Yaddle explained. The Jedi Master entered the younglings' part of the temple and smiled. Gather around, children. She used the Force to add a touch of suggestion in her voice, and soon dozens of kids scurried forward. We're going on excursion. Follow us and don't separate no matter what happen, all right? Yes, Master Yaddle. A chorus of excited agreements answered. Let's go. We don't have time to waste. Yaddle ordered firmly. Security control room. Jedi Temple. Coruscant. Master Dralig, is there a problem? The captain overseeing security asked. He had seen some irregular movements by temple guards and had requested to speak with someone on the council, though so far his inquiries were rebuffed. He did put his men on higher alert just in case. You can say so, Jake. Chin smiled sadly. I need to ask you to stand down. The door opened, revealing more temple guards, who had their weapons drawn and activated, pointing them at the clones stationed outside. What is the meaning of this? Jake asked. We'll be leaving Coruscant and can't have any accidents happening. The Jedi Master explained. I can't allow such a thing without clearing it with command and the Chancellor. The captain pointed out. I see. Well, we were afraid of that. Will you stand down peacefully? Chin asked again. I can't do that, Jake said stiffly. He dived to the left and drew his saber, only to be caught midair by a telekinetic blast that slammed him into a console. The temple guards either used the Force or their weapons to take out the clones manning the security center. Damn it, this isn't how I wanted it to go. Shin shook his head in regret. 2 of the soldiers were dead, with most others suffering blunt force trauma after being slammed hard into either consoles or walls. Why the criff did you kill those 2? At least we have control over security. One of the guards pointed out. He was immediately proven wrong when alarms began screaming and the door behind them slammed shut. Alert! Rogue Jedi are attacking GAR personnel stationed at the Jedi Temple. I repeat, Rogue Jedi are attacking GAR personnel stationed at the Jedi Temple. All GAR units in the AO ensure your own security and engage rogue elements. Take out the computers, Shin shouted. He ignited his lightsaber and began slashing through the consoles, though he knew it was too little too late. Sith damned. Get to our people now and take out any clones on your way. We need to get away from Coruscant now. Dralig ordered. Conflagration. =RK=. Part 5. Outskirts. Tipoca City. Camino. Attack. Echo ordered a heartbeat after someone on the other side figured out the ambush. One of his men slammed a fist over the control panel of the door, separating them from the side passage leading straight at the enemy flank. Echo waved forward and charged with his brothers following on his heels. The clone turned right and aimed his grenade launcher. He took just a couple of steps in the enemy's direction when an armored figure appeared at the end of the corridor and he pressed the trigger. Whoever that was, they managed to duck before the resulting explosion, though Echo was sure they were caught in the blast wave. As he advanced, the clone sent grenade left and right, keeping the end of the corridor clean from enemies. 5. A frag exploded. 4. Concussion. 3. An iron 1. 2. Another frag. 1. A high explosive and he was out. Echo dropped the gun and retrieved a heavy blaster he had slung over his back. His timing was good, he had shouldered and aiming the weapon when he reached the junction at the end of the corridor. The clone swept left, leaving right for the man behind him. The echo of explosions and the iron discharges made hearing and scanners less than reliable, leaving the soldiers to rely on good old-fashioned Mark I eyeballs, though in the 501st case, most actually got upgrades in that department. In Echo's case, one of his eyes was artificial and able to see infrared, which helped him locate the enemy through dust and smoke obscuring everything. A bulky figure turned his way and Echo promptly sent a burst at it. His thermals were partially obscured by the blaster bolt's reaction with the enemy's shield, which unfortunately held. The clone ducked back and shouted a warning. A solid laser beam went through the space where his torso was a moment ago and struck the edge of the corridor, barely missing Boomer. Hut spawn. That was close. Echo mutely nodded. The laser had carved deep gorge in the wall, which was more or less solid metal. If that had hit his brother in the back. Echo snarled at the thought and pulled out a thermal detonator which he sent at the bastard's downrange. A flash of light and a deafening thunderclap announced his success. Then the heat wave hit, making everyone sweat despite their environmentally sealed armors. Echo glanced across the corner and ducked back when someone shot at him through the haze of the explosion. That part of the corridor was wrecked, opening it to the surrounding levels. We need to push them back further. Divide and isolate the bastards, Boomer shouted. Echo nodded. Grenades, he and concussion, then we advance to the right. He pulled another thermal detonator and threw it where the first go off to create distraction. So far so good. =RK=. Fives led his own squad in another flanking maneuver. He had to move slower to let the replacements fostered to the 501st keep up with him and his two enhanced buddies. To say he was surprised that the ambush didn't go exactly as planned would be a lie. More often than not the enemy tended to be inconvenient like that. Still, things began well enough. 2 rockets were sent downrange by the newbies lugging the heavy weapons, then everyone threw a wide assortment of grenades to clear the way. The clone was taken aback when one of the power-armored enemies remained on their feet after a missile detonated against their shields. The defensive barrier winced out and the bastard was left intact, for a second or so anyway, because then the second rocket slammed into his shoulder and tore the whole arm away. Even if otherwise the enemy appeared intact, there was no way that fella was still alive. The overpressure wave and shock would have seen to that. Anyway, it was a moot point because multiple grenades landed around the body and that was that. Go, Fives shouted. The overall plan was to hit the enemy from all sides, use the side passage to divide them in smaller, much easier to handle groups and defeat them in detail before their Jedi could turn the tide. That at least appeared to be working. Even with a warning preventing a complete surprise, if that was at all possible while the remnant were in enemy territory seeking contact with the GAR, the opening stage of the ambush went reasonably well. Multiple power-armored troopers were taken out before they could properly respond to the threat. However, the rest of the attack diverged from the plan significantly. The remnant refused to be isolated. Any surprise they felt lasted mere seconds, before they rallied and began counter-attacking. Fives hit the ground when 2 enemies got to the corners at the end of the corridor before his unit could reach it and opened fire. Blaster bolts flew above him even as he returned fire. He saw Cypher continue charging while actually dodging 2 shots from a heavy blaster before slamming in the small cover provided by the indentation around a sealed door to the right. Someone screamed in pain from behind, announcing that the enemy finally got lucky. Smoke. Fives snapped after hitting one of the people in power armor only to see his shots being tanked by a shield. Staying in the open against such firepower was suicide. Cypher, get that open. Fives ordered and rolled away to avoid a burst that left a line of glowing holes in the floor. A smoke grenade detonated, filling the corridor in silver mist. That was going to buy them a few moments. Get to solid cover. Fives ordered more quietly. He got up and crawled towards Cypher's position. I'm almost done, Sarg. Gwa. A hulking figure appeared through the smoke and slammed a vibro blade through Cypher's back. For a moment Fives stood froze. How the criff that thing managed to sneak up on them. The figure raised its gun and the clone's training kicked in. He dived away, formed the line of fire and brought his own weapon to bear on the enemy. Somehow he managed to open fire before hitting the ground, which had predictable results. The recoil was just enough to make him land badly and cost him precious moments. His shot actually hit, however it wasted itself on the shield. Fives had to roll away again, when suddenly the other enemy emerged from the smoke. Eerie, the bastard made no sound. Some kind of stealth field? The though ran through Fives' brain before he acted on instinct and jumped away from the charging brute. Once the second armored figure was past him, it continued its dash towards the rest of the squad. It was met by a fusillade of fire and it answered in kind. However, Fives was too busy to pay any attention to the firefight besides merely acknowledging it. The maniac who gutted Siptha like a fish was upon him, waving that vibro blade. On a closer look, the thing was actually built into the armor's left hand. Seeing no other option, Fives met the enemy headlong. He used his cybernetically boosted reflexes to dive under a swing and roll behind the armored grunt. Fives raised up on one knee, brought his weapon forward and pressed the trigger. The barrel was inside the shield, making its existence moot. Hot plasma hammered the back and side of the power armor. It might have even worked if Fives could have kept firing for a bit longer. Instead he was forced to lunge back, which made him fall on his back in order to avoid a backhand swipe that nearly cleaved his head in two. Seeing no other option, Fives pulled off the single thermal detonator he carried, activated it and threw the explosive at the lumbering enemy's feet. That bastard then had the audacity to kick the detonator at the clone before literally flying back. Fives had a moment to register the sound of repulsors before lunging towards the live explosive. =RK=. Hex was a fresh clone. He finished his training mere days before the invasion began. He was among the best of his class, completed ARC training with flying colors too. He thought himself quite good too, something even his Mandalorian instructors agreed to before leaving Kamino. That's why he was chosen along few lucky others to become a part of an elite formation, the 501st Special Operations Legion. He had heard stories about them, some quite wild too. Hex didn't believe most of them. He might have been young, however he was no dummy. There were enough veterans passing through Kamino to assist in the training before being reassigned to make him understand that most war stories were quite embellished in one way or another. A single training session with the veterans of the 501st changed his mind. They were unreal, much faster and stronger than a regular clone like himself. Their reflexes and reaction times were unreal too. After just 4 soldiers tore apart the newcomers, Hex included, and there were 23 of them, the young clone knew that all those stories were understated if anything. He was proud to fight besides warriors of such caliber. Hex knew that with the 501st on his side, there simply wasn't a force in the galaxy that could stand on their way. That happy state of affairs continued until the Separatist fleet managed to break through and landed forces in the city of his birth. Kamino, especially Tiboka City, had a special place in the heart of every clone. This place was their home. The only home that they ever knew. It was where their younger brothers were born, raised and trained. If there was one place in the galaxy which every single clone would gladly die to protect, it was Kamino. Hex is no exception. That made seeing his home invaded hard to bear. Watching the camera feeds of the enemy plowing through defenses set up by veteran soldiers didn't help. Yet, Hex was a member of the 501st. There was no enemy that could stop them. He was elated when the order to intercept the enemy finally came down the chain of command. Hex hungrily anticipated ambushing the hut-spawned bastards who came to ruin his home. He cheered when his missile took out one of the power-armored invaders. Hex wasn't cheering now. He wasn't thinking about protecting his home either. The only thing on his mind was putting down the monster that blew apart 2 of his brothers and was advancing towards him and the rest of the squad no matter how many times they shot at it. Even as the shield protecting the armored behemoth fell, it continued to advance and fire back. Finn, the The last remaining veteran in the squad took a grenade from his belt, however he was torn apart by heavy blaster fire before he could arm it. Then another brother went down and there were only 3 remaining. They fought shoulder to shoulder, pulling back in good order and constantly shooting at the enemy. Its armor began melting from the constant fire. Instead of faltering, it actually flew forward, firing all the way. Hex was the only one fast enough to dive out of the way. His brothers were literally ran over and their broken bodies swept away. "Criffing die," Hex shouted. He saw red and threw his blaster away, then grabbed 2 grenades, disengaged the safeties and pressed the triggers before charging at the armored monster who was turning his way. A massive explosion sounded from behind and Hex grinned. The Sarge got one of the bastards, he was sure of it. Hex was almost upon the monster, when it jumped back and flew away until hitting the end of the corridor, then it began raising its gun. Even in his enraged haze, Hex figured out he won't be reaching it in time. He made to throw the grenades, then there was only searing pain. Hex crumbled to the ground and saw one of the live weapons roll in front of his eyes. This wasn't fair. He was part of the 501st. They never lost. The grenades detonated. "We won't be talking about this," one of the power-armored men muttered. "If the captain see how we criffed around, she'll have our heads." The other agreed and they both went to rejoin the battle. =RK=. Part 6. Outskirts. Tiboka City. Camino. Rex sprinted on the heels of the Jedi Master. He cleared the corner a heartbeat behind her and saw Shark T thrust her left hand forward. The clone wasn't quite sure, though he thought he saw a shiver pass through the air down the corridor. The point man leading the enemy formation had their hand up too and was the one of the few who remained on their feet. The rest of the remnant vanguard were thrown on air back as if shoved hard. There were only 3 people standing upright, 2 men and the woman in front. If they were surprised by what just happened, none of them showed it. Instead the trio activated lightsabers of their own, all blue and charged. The woman made a beeline towards the Jedi Master, while the others sprinted by the walls. Rex took aim and opened fire to rightmost Jedi. He could hear the rest of the unit coming in behind him, which was good. They were going to need the firepower. That was painfully obvious when every single shot he sent downrange was reflected back at him. His enhanced reflexes actually gave him a chance to sidestep a few of the bolts and he was lucky enough that his shield absorbed the rest. His men finally arrived and opened up raining shot after shot at the approaching Jedi. Instead of stopping or at least faltering, those 2 sped up and began running up the walls of all things. That was enough to throw off the aim of some clones for a moment or 2, time well spent by the enemy. The Jedi acted in unison. One made a pulling motion and only the implants increasing Rex's strength allowed him to keep his gun even if it was a close call. Some of his men, who didn't have such extensive enhancements, didn't manage it and their weapons were torn out of their hands. That's when the other Jedi acted. Rex felt like a wall slammed into him. A moment of disorientation followed, a sense of falling and then a painful contact with the floor. This time he lost his gun. "Up and at them!" the commander shouted. He jumped on his feet and grappled for his sidearm. Rex was relieved to see Shark T using her powers to pull back one of the Jedi coming at his men, however there was nothing left to stop the other. The enemy jumped off the wall and landed in front of the closest clone. His lightsaber came down and Tio lost his head. Phil tried to tackle the Jedi, got suspended in midair for his troubles before that bastard impaled him. "Kill him," Rex snapped and charged the Jedi. His men got out of their shock and followed his example. The Jedi strode forward without a care in the world. He waved a hand and another invisible wall of force sent Rex tumbling on the floor. By the time he was up, 2 more of his brothers were cut down. Someone had kept his gun and opened fire only to be ignored. The Jedi simply let his shields take the shots and killed another clone. Only then did he deem fit to begin deflecting the incoming fire. That man never stopped walking forward. It felt like, with every step the Jedi took, Rex lost a brother. "Sam," one of the new guys screamed, and charged the killer coming for them all. The Jedi finally paused. He clutched his fist and pumped it in the air. Sam flew up and with every motion slammed in the ceiling with bone-breaking force. The enemy lowered his hand, yet the young clone left hanging as if embedded into the metal. "Surrender. I won't ask again." The Jedi spoke for the first time. His voice was mechanical, likely thanks to the comm in his helmet. "Go to hell," Rex snarled. He picked up a pistol laying next to him and began firing. "You first." The Jedi shrugged and continued his march. A dismissive gesture slammed a clone into the wall. He fell and didn't get up. Yet another kid was next. He was pulled off his feet and impaled. Then the Jedi walked below Sam and flourished his saber, nearly cutting the poor bastard in two. The murderer took another step forward and pointed his weapon at the remaining soldiers. It was only then that Sam finally fell from the ceiling, hitting the floor behind his killer. Rex looked at his brothers. "General, we need to pull back now," the commander shouted. "Cass with me." Rex looked over his shoulder. "Run, fools." When he looked back at the Jedi, the man gave him a small nod. Rex was surprised that he felt no fear. He was totally outclassed. Everything he tried so far had proven useless against the Jedi. He knew he was about to die, and the only thing he felt was regret that he failed his men and led them against an enemy he had underestimated. He believed that surprise, numbers and the equipment the clones had combined with Chi's assistance would be enough. After all, Rex had seen Jedi die before. He knew they could be overwhelmed. When figuring out how to take out these bastards, he should have used General Vale as a baseline, not the Jedi generals he knew. "Crafit." The commander nodded at his brother. He activated the blade built in the right arm guard of his armor, took a grenade from his belt and charged the Jedi. "RK=" "You should surrender, Master T, was it?" The woman in power armor engaging her spoke for the first time. "I don't think so." The Jedi Master parried a thrust from the younger-sounding female before sidestepping a slash aimed at her hand from her other opponent. "Your men are dying. You can't stop us. There is no shame in surrender. It will save your lives." The remnant Jedi tried again. Shakti knew that the woman was right about Rex and his men. She felt them dying one after another, slaughtered by the Jedi she was unable to stop. T parried an attack, riposted, ducked and weaved between the blades seeking her flesh. She gathered the force around her hand and sent it forward as a battering ram aimed at the other woman. The Old Republic Jedi simply slapped the attack away and the energy went to dent the wall, making the corridor ring like a gong. As if the situation wasn't bad enough, T could see the ambush falling not only in the front of the enemy column. A clone squad was hitting the remnant vanguard from the back. They had demolished the corridor behind them, and their presence was the only reason the Jedi Master hadn't been overrun by the power-armored troopers who followed her opponents. Instead they were busy killing the Republic soldiers attacking them. T faltered when Rex ordered a retreat. She dared glance back and winced. Most of the clones were dead or pulling back. Only Rex and one of his brothers still stood, obviously ready to buy their brothers a few precious seconds. "It's over, Master T. Stand down." The enemy offered again. Shakti narrowed her eyes. She was out of time. The soldiers down the corridor were retreating too, and soon she will be facing more enemies. The Jedi Master closed her eyes and deactivated her lightsaber. Was this it? Was this how it all ends? No. The anger T had been feeling ever since Vale used her and threw her away rose to the surface. She would not fall here. Shakti still had unfinished business with Vale. She couldn't be defeated, couldn't be captured before she faced that man one last time. Her anger grew hotter and Shakti felt a surge of cold, soothing power rushing through her. She thrust her hands forward, the new energy flowed through her arms and discharged in a massive shock wave, more powerful than anything she had managed before this day. The remnant Jedi managed to defend themselves, however both of them staggered and had to take a few steps back. The power-armored soldiers behind them were caught off guard and sent sliding across the floor, while every single piece of debris in the vicinity flew through the corridor with enough power to dent steel. T didn't waste the opportunity. She turned around and began running. Her anger grew to new heights when she saw the Jedi she missed execute one of the clones while Rex stood frozen mid-swing. T voiced her anger through a voiceless roar, just like her ancestors did before the dawn of civilization. The Force gave her more strength and she descended like a blur at the Jedi who murdered her men. He managed to turn around and parry her swing, yet that wasn't nearly enough. The Force was singing to the Jedi Master. It gave her ice-cold purpose and strength. Despite the power armor, the remnant Jedi was brought on one knee by the sheer raw power behind the swing. She struck again and this time tore the lightsaber away from the man's hands, leaving him open for the killing blow. T raised her weapon for one last strike, however it never landed. In the last moment she was pulled back and her lightsaber slashed through the floor between her and her victim. The Jedi Master looked back to those who denied her vengeance. Behind them their friends were getting on their feet and turning T's way. Shark T snarled at the denied kill and ran. The Jedi dove out of her way, avoiding her last attempt to take him out. At last that was enough to release Rex, who stumbled forward. T went past the clone, grabbed his arm and dragged him towards the end of the corridor. Blaster bolts began whizzing past them, something blew up behind and finally they were going past the corner and getting out of sight. Shark T let Rex go, helped him turn around and pushed him forward. "Go," she wheezed. The cold power rushing through her veins was disappearing and leaving her feel exhausted. Now it was Rex's turn to grab her shoulder and drag her. T bit her lip and pushed herself to move faster. She could hear the sound of approaching armored feet. Conflagration. =RK=. Part 7. Operations Room. GAR HQ. Coruscant. When the chaos erupted around him, Obi-Wan was slow to react. Stunned disbelief made him sluggish. His mind whirled in circles, fighting to comprehend the obvious. The conservatives were staging a coup, that was the only explanation. Yet, even after all that happened, even now that the proof stared him in the face, Obi-Wan struggled to believe it. Jedi turning against the Republic at this time? It was unthinkable, sheer madness. Only reflexes honed by months of war saved Kenobi. He rose his blade to parry an incoming slash while his mind was still preoccupied with processing the impossible. Obi-Wan slapped away a thrust and stepped back, out of the range of another slash guided by the Force. His mind was finally rebooted by sensing one of his aides, Ree, a young cheerful Rhodian, die behind him. Kenobi felt like awakening from a dream and walking straight into chaos. He flinched when another man he had been working closely with for more than a month was suddenly snuffed out. A pang of anger was born in his heart and was immediately stroked when Obi-Wan saw from the corner of his eye Tallar Fall clutching his shoulder. That brief distraction almost cost him everything. Teen fainted and Kenobi fell for it. The Force sent him a warning that was barely enough for the former Jedi to jump back. Instead of getting skewered, the tip of Teen's lightsaber merely burned through Obi-Wan's uniform and left a short stinging burn above his stomach. He had to gain the initiative, break the Jedi Master's rhythm, before the Horned Man could leverage the upper hand he had. Kenobi never got the opportunity. A grenade flew his way and Obi-Wan acted without thinking. His hand snapped up, guiding the Force to stop the weapon before it could reach a group of officers taking cover behind a row of consoles in the back of the room. Before Obi-Wan could send it back, Teen used the opportunity to push the grenade closer to Kenobi. It detonated just 2 meters away from the former Jedi who lived thanks to hastily erected barrier made by the Force itself. However, the defense was far from perfect. While it stopped the overpressure wave from turning Obi-Wan's organs into soup, it was less effective against the fragments. Some tore through the barrier and slashed through the green fabric of his uniform. Kenobi staggered back as hot metal slashed through his left side. He had a moment to curse himself for not coming to HQ with his armor on lately, then Teen was upon him. The Jedi Master didn't escape the blast unscratched either. His right cheek was a shredded mess and his horns were the proud owners of still smoking pieces of grenade casing. However, the Jedi's armor protected him from any debilitating injuries courtesy of the shrapnel. Teen jumped at Kenobi and forced him back before stepping past the former Jedi and made him turn his back to the Cathar soldiers at the door. The feeling of immediate deadly danger was coming from all around Obi-Wan. It was like the Force was screaming at him loud enough to deafen everyone nearby. It was quite superficial too. Obi-Wan knew how deep trouble he was in. His wounds were slowing him down, the blood leaking from his left side weakening him with every heartbeat. Not that it mattered right then. Having his back turned to soldiers already aiming to gun him down was more immediate concern. Teen attacking to keep him in that position was an issue too. At that moment, Obi-Wan's mid was crystal clear. He parried a stab, pushed away a thrust aimed at his heart and whirled in place, sweeping his lightsaber in an arc around him. The Force guided his blade and allowed him to deflect most of the blaster bolts coming at him. A few missed when he moved away from where the enemy anticipated him to be. One shot caught him from behind, crisping his left shoulder and making him stumble and fall to his knees. It was a fortunate hit, otherwise Obi-Wan would have ran straight into Teen's riposte and ended up in 2 pieces. Instead he barely avoided the Jedi Master's saber. Kenobi drew on the Force as much as he could and pushed the searing pain away. He rolled away from a blaster barrage, a choking cry escaping from his lips as the shrapnel in his side moved, tearing at his flesh. At least when he jumped on his feet, Obi-Wan had Teen between him and the enemy soldiers, which spared him from getting shot again. The Jedi Master paused. He looked at Kenobi, then glanced around and winced. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," Teen spat in frustration. "Why did you support the Sith, Obi-Wan?" The Jedi snapped and advanced towards his wounded opponent. For a brief moment, Kenobi was back on Mandalore. He was looking at Satine, imagining her dying in his hands. He heard Vale's question. He remembered choosing his wife above his duty as a Jedi. Then Obi-Wan moved, frantically parrying Teen's onslaught. Satine's face flashed before Kenobi's eyes. He put everything he had into keeping Teen's lightsaber away, and for a few seconds they were evenly matched. However, Obi-Wan was getting weaker, slower. He had to fall back, relying on his Saurisu's superb defense. That bought him a few more seconds before the Jedi Master dashed boldly at his former comrade and locked their weapons together. They stayed that way for merely a heartbeat before Obi-Wan's remaining strength failed him and his lightsaber was torn away from his grasp. The Jedi kicked him in the gut and sent him on his knees. A brief look of triumph passed through Teen's eyes and he stabbed at Kenobi. Obi-Wan got his good arm up and caught the lightsaber's blade in his hand. He channeled all the force he could still grasp into his palm and stopped the weapon cold. Teen nodded in respect, then kicked Kenobi in the chest and sent him crashing on his back. "This never should have happened, Obi-Wan," the Jedi Master whispered. "You were one of our best. A beacon of light in this dark galaxy." Obi-Wan looked up at Teen. He was spent. The Jedi shook his head in regret and slowly walked towards Kenobi. Obi-Wan closed his eyes and thought about Satine. If he was about to die, he wanted his last thoughts to be about the woman who loved. Thinking about what was happening, about Jedi fighting against Jedi, that was simply too painful. It was testament to his failure. A hazy image of Satine swam in front of Obi-Wan's mind. He noticed that her hair was unkempt, her eyes were red and puffy from crying. The angle changed and Satine's image became blurry. She looked different, regal. Her hair was made up and fell like a golden waterfall around her shoulders. Satine was looking at a tall granite pillar, covered with carved-up names. His wife took a step closer and gently traced one of them with a finger. For an instant the vision became a bit clearer and Obi-Wan could recognize his name, standing next to Valanthra's. The angle shifted again, and Kenobi saw his wife from the right. Satine was smiling sadly at the monument, because now it was obvious what the pillar was. It was surrounded by 4 burning cauldrons, each flanked by troopers standing at parade rest as honor guards. Yet, that was merely an afterthought. Obi-Wan's eyes were drawn to a small bundle in Satine's other hand. She was looking down at it and smiling sadly. The vision shifted again, coming closer to his wife, and Kenobi saw what she was holding close to her heart. It was a tiny baby, who was smiling at Satine. The child turned his head and looked straight at Obi-Wan. He stared at 2 sparkling blue eyes just like his own and smiled. "I'm sorry, Obi-Wan." Teen's voice shattered the vision. Kenobi's eyes snapped open and he looked up at the Jedi Master towering above him. Teen had his lightsaber raised and ready to plunge it in Obi-Wan's heart. The time seemed to slow down to a crawl. Obi-Wan felt like freezing, a chill the likes of which he had never felt before crawled through his body. The lights built into the ceiling dimmed, making Teen appear to be cloaked in shadows, with only his lightsaber chasing off the darkness. Obi-Wan stared at the descending weapon. Its light became blinding and all he could see was Satine holding the baby. Their child, his mind supplied. His daughter, he was certain of it. A daughter he would never know, never hold. Kenobi could feel the chill spreading, slowing down his heartbeat, almost like it was freezing the blood in his veins. Finally, Obi-Wan understood the choice he made back on Mandalore. His wife, his unborn daughter. They were what mattered. They were the reason he turned his back to everything he knew, everything he had been taught to believe in. They were the choice he would make again if given the opportunity. Kenobi stared at the small smiling face of his daughter. The very idea that he might not be there for her made him furious. It was unacceptable. Unthinkable. The frost spreading through Obi-Wan turned into molten magma. The Force shivered when he reached for her. Obi-Wan didn't open himself for the source of his power. He didn't threat her as the ally who had been beside him ever since he could remember. Instead, Kenobi demanded her power. He wrenched it into his body, demanded as much strength as she could give him, and the dark side complied eagerly at that. Obi-Wan could dimly sense the dark side rejoice at his choice. A part of him could dimly feel that the balance of the Force subtly shift. For a heartbeat he felt confusion. He knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that the galaxy didn't become darker because of what he was doing. The light side didn't become dimmer. Nor did the dark gain power, even if he knew he was taking a firm step towards the darkness he had been taught to fear. It was simply different. The moment passed. Raw, unimaginable power surged through Obi-Wan. His anger fueled the dark side. His love to Satine and that tiny angel he already loved with his whole heart made the light side literally blaze within him. Obi-Wan's eyes focused. Satines lightsaber was frozen mid-stab, mere centimeters above Kenobi's heart. The Jedi Master's eyes widened in shock. He struggled to push his weapon down to no avail. "Impossible," Satine exclaimed. Obi-Wan didn't answer. He slowly raised his good arm and pointed it at the Jedi. A ball of pure light formed in his palm and was immediately surrounded by a corona of crackling, crimson lighting. It suddenly flew at Satine, who jumped back and raised an arm to protect himself. A force barrier materialized in front of the Jedi Master, then it was promptly shattered by Obi-Wan's attack. His shield was triggered by the lighting and popped up, stripped away from raw dark side energy. That however was enough to dissipate the outer layer of the attack, and only the ball of light struck Satine with bone-breaking force. The Jedi Master was blasted away. He felt multiple ribs snap before slamming into one of his soldiers and hitting the ground in a tangle of limbs. He laid there stunned for a few moments, before his armor administered painkillers and stimulants that cleared his mind. Satine groaned in pain and looked around. He was just outside the operations center, laying among multiple bodies. The last of his soldiers were either on their knees or prone on the ground to present smaller targets and trading fire with an ever-increasing number of clones. Griff. Satine glanced back through the door. He used the Force to seek Kenobi and smiled grimly. The former Jedi was out. He could sense that Obi-Wan was still alive, but no longer any threat. Feeling another of the men who followed him here die, snapped Satine back to the firefight around him. There were only a handful of soldiers left. People who followed him here, despite the unlikely odds of success. People dying because of him. He glanced back at Obi-Wan. At the end the former Jedi was like an open book. Satine had no doubt left that Kenobi had fallen. The Jedi could feel the dark side practically leaking from the man before he blasted him away. Yet, somehow he was not only using the light side too, but they were in balance within Kenobi. Which according to everything Satine knew, everything he was taught about the Force, was supposed to be impossible. That knowledge shook him. Satine knew that Obi-Wan was no longer a Jedi, and not because he had been expelled. Yet, right now, he couldn't call the man a Sith either. One of their kind could never draw so much power from the light side if able to touch it at all. Satine closed his eyes briefly. The council was mistaken. He was wrong. Whatever Kenobi was, he hadn't fallen. He was no Sith. He didn't deserve to die for a betrayal which he might very well be innocent of. Another of Satine's men fell to the clones. He felt the Force tremble. Jedi were dying. The Jedi Master could feel it. The galaxy was growing darker. He had been a fool. He was responsible for leaving the Order, the Jedi as a whole, no choice but follow him in this madness. Satine snarled when he felt the cold touch of the dark side. He could sense its triumph as good men and women died. At that moment Satine knew. He had been deceived. Betrayed. By the Jedi teachings. By his own stubborn refusal to see how the galaxy had changed in mere months. By his own heart, when he left his emotion rule him and went to confront Vale in the Senate. By his mind when he refused to stop and seek the reasons why everything went so wrong within himself and the Jedi first, before blaming everything solely on the Sith. More people he knew were suddenly dying on Coruscant. No more. Satine grunted in pain as he got up. It was too late to stop this madness. All he could do now was save whoever he could, and if he was fortunate to leave Coruscant alive, seek the faults in himself that led to this madness. Only then he could begin figuring out a way to end this madness, if at all possible. If it wasn't already too late, because Satine was afraid that no matter what he did from now on, no matter if the coup succeeded in its primary objectives, the dark side might triumph anyway. He let the Force flow through him. It soothed the pain in his chest and invigorated him. Yet, it wasn't the calm feeling of the light side. Not at all. Satine felt the Force flowing through him being fueled by his emotions, anger, Despair, regret, the overwhelming feeling of failure. He raised a hand and his lightsaber flew into it. "Follow me. We're leaving," Teen shouted to the few Cathar commandos still on their feet. "Grab the wounded, I'll clear up a path." Teen strode in front of his remaining men and began deflecting the incoming blaster bolts. He found he didn't particularly care if the dark side was aiding him right now. He was a failure as a Jedi anyway. No matter what happened, Teen was the one who ultimately led to countless Jedi dying right now with more to follow. He screamed his frustration, his despair at the clones in front of him. The dark side responded and turned his wordless shout into a physical force that threw those nearby off their feet. "I'm sorry," Teen repeated, then decapitated a clone trying to find his footing. The Jedi Master caught another soldier in a telekinetic grip and crushed the poor bastard, then continued striding forward. His lightsaber danced guided by the Force and sent back every shot coming his way to its sender. Those wearing the new armors merely tanked the reflected firepower. Yet, half the clones were clad in the old phase I suits and they began falling one after another. Teen pulled away the weapons of the closest troopers as he approached the end of the corridor and cut through a soldier that charged him with a knife he pulled from his belt. The dark side sang with joy at the slaughter he was committing. It grew that much stronger with every Jedi who fell on Coruscant. With every step he took forward, with every life he took, Teen grew angrier, at himself, at the dark side, at the Force itself. That anger merely granted him more power, thus stroking his fury further. Teen caught a blaster bolt aimed at his heart, took a step forward and slammed the energy in the chest of a clone unlucky enough to be in his way. The man gave out a chopped scream as the blaster shot burned through his armor and seared his chest. Teen let him fall and impaled the next clone that came in range. The worst was that he could feel the dark side mocking him, corrupting him. With every new kill, Teen's revulsion at himself grew. With every death he dealt, he began to feel a tiny bit of pleasure at besting another enemy, at removing another obstacle in his path. Teen felt himself slowly but surely falling, knew that it was inevitable unless he stopped right now. He felt the dark side laughing at the idea. He could all but see the consequence, he and his few men being gunned down by enraged clones. Teen faltered. Was this how Obi-Wan began walking down the dark path? By facing the choice between dying along someone he cared about, no matter if it was a forbidden love or a sense of duty and obligation towards people who willingly walked with him in hell? A choked laugh escaped his lips. The dark side was truly an insidious bitch. A blaster bolt slipped past Teen and hit one of his men in the head, killing him instantly. The Jedi roared his despair and charged the clones. The die was cast. The sides drawn. There was no turning back. All Teen knew was the need to get his people out in the dark side's mocking laugh. The bitch had won.